Hello, everyone, and welcome to Powerhouse Working Moms Mindset Summit. We are in our third week here of the Powerhouse Mindset Summit. Hopefully, you guys have been enjoying the week full of speakers and activities. And today, I'm so excited to bring to you our new speaker who rethinks everything. It's not that she can't make up her mind. It's that she believes we are hungry for growth. And she has spoken at the UN as well as Brazil, Rome, London, and throughout the US about how we can reclaim our health, happiness, and humanity at work. And she has helped many companies create a healthy work culture where people belong and work better. So she was born in Denmark and is now a New Yorker. She has a very diverse background in marketing, design, fashion, retail, management, and team development. And in 2004, after both her parents died of cancer, she founded Path for Life and to help people reclaim their personal power by taking charge of their health and well-being even when they're busy. And during these challenging times, we're all incredibly busy. So she's a rethinker, a performance and cultural strategist, executive coach, and C-suite advisor. She's also a certified mindfulness meditation teacher, an integrative functional nutrition and meta medicine health coach. Wow, that's hard to say, but I think I did it okay. And she's also a certified hypnotherapist, but don't worry, she is not going to put you in a trance today. Her book, Eat to Feel Full and Nourish Yourself for Good, has gained nationwide recognition in the news and is a new approach to getting healthy without dieting. That sounds amazing. So when she's not helping people rethink her relationship with self-care at work, you can find her at the Catskills in upstate New York doing yoga or snuggling with her dog, Maya, the Rottweiler girl, who is, by the way, has her own Instagram account, so check that out. So helping us with total wellness at work, please join me in welcoming speaker, author, ex-coffee addict, Jeanette Bernay.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And I think I want to start out by saying, well, of course, welcome to everyone who are on the call and those people who are going to be listening to the replay afterwards. And I think it would be good to just see in the chat how many of you were here last week. Put an N for no and yes or Y for yes, just so I know how many of you were here last week when we did the first part, because I'm going to do a little bit of a recap, both so that we remember, but also just so that if those are coming on for today, feel like they have a little bit of information from last week as well. I see Nicole was here last week, not you, Nicole, but the other Nicole. Two Nicoles, yes. Okay. And then
just for those who are new to chat, you'll probably find it on the bottom of your screen. Yeah. There's like a little explanation point that says chat that you can respond yes or no there.
Yeah, yeah. And in general, put your questions in the chat. We'll be following that along as we talk about this. It's going to be a little bit more of an interactive sort of coaching session, workshop coaching type of session, in the sense of trying to help you shift some of the things that are going on in terms of the mindset around self-care. Healthcare and self-care is probably the same thing these days. So we are going to do that. And also, if you're not familiar with Zoom, you can double click on the image that you want to have as the larger image, so that you can see both Nicole and I, or just have it on speaker view and you'll see me when I'm speaking and Nicole when she's speaking. But you can double click on your window and you can make it smaller and larger by sort of pulling in the corner of it. So you can sort of design your own experience. I will also be sharing screen here and there, but most of it will be sort of us interacting and being engaged in this way. So one of the things about self-care, and I hear it all the time, is that it's almost like we burn out from self-care. I don't know if you have felt that it's almost like a burden to think about, oh, I got to do this because I'm supposed to take care of myself. And so it often happens that people are a little bit like the relationship we have with self-care is a little bit like all the things we have to do. And it becomes this idea that we are doing self-care. And I want to shift our mindset a little bit so it's more about the relationship that we have with ourselves is a self-caring relationship. So if we can shift it and look at it that way, well, if we are self-caring, like if we care for something or somebody, do we care that way for ourselves too? So there's a lot more of that relationship than just the things we do, right? Now, you can then argue that self-care has to show up somehow. Of course it does. So self-care, the relationship we have with ourselves, is bringing us to the habits that helps us feel better, take better care of our health, get better care of our daily focus, our daily energy, all of those things that help us feel empowered, on top of our game, sort of feeling that we are owning ourselves, this idea of feeling in charge of our own health. And I'd be curious to see in the chat, put in there, what is your relationship with self-care? Is it difficult, easy? Just put those two in. Is it easy or is it difficult? Just put in whatever you feel is the challenge for you. And see, what about you, Nicole? Do you feel it's difficult or easy?
Yeah, I was just putting in the chat. I definitely feel like it's difficult to choose me versus I have 3 boys and work, and it's difficult to choose my self-care as one of those options. I'm trying to get better, but it's definitely hard.
Yeah, and it's because of time, right? It's like it's the time piece.
Yeah, it's the time. It's definitely the time piece, and I think somebody mentioned on one of these sessions, like, just you need to get up earlier, like get up the 2 hours earlier before everybody else gets up, and that will be your time. And I have a difficult time doing that. So then how do I find the time if I'm not taking the time 2 hours before everybody else gets up?
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of and we talked about this last time as well. So I'm not going to go deeply into it for those of you who were already on the call last week or saw the replay. But I do think that the importance is that we look at this and say, well, it's how we spend our time is based on what? It's based on our attention. It's based on our awareness. Like, because we waste a lot of time sometimes, we get lost in thoughts that are not productive. And so some of the things we're going to talk about today is awareness, right? So one of the things we stepped into last time was that what I call self-care is self-communication, self-awareness, self-responsibility, and self-expression. I can never get that 4th finger up, so I should probably do it this way, 4th. So those are the 4 bits and pieces of self-care, and it's really, again, that relationship we have with ourselves that causes us to take better care of ourselves. And it's not about just the habits, it's leading to the habits. So I'm going to share the screen from one of the things that we talked about last time, but I'm going to add, where are we? There. There we go. Just share this for you. I'm going to try to figure out how to play. There we go. Play. So do you see the screen fully now, or do you have my picture sort of over one of them?
Yeah, we see the screen fully.
You see the full one without my picture on top of it. Okay, good.
Yes. Yep.
So we have these different relationships with ourselves. So last time we talked about what's the communication, what's the self-talk, what is the self-communication? And a lot of the self-communication that we have, if you remember last time we talked about, are you your own inner critic or are you your own inner coach? So today we're going to talk about self-awareness, and it's very connected to the self-talk. So the self-awareness very often is something that we are learning as we go along. We keep growing our self-awareness. We keep becoming more and more sort of discovering ourselves in new ways. It's kind of part of our maturity, part of our learning, part of our growth is that self-awareness. It's how we bring ourselves with us into the workday, into our relationships. But it starts with the relationship we have with ourselves. And last time I shared a see here where we are at. Last time I shared this one here, which is the self-care is between our relationship with self, our relationship with other, and our relationship with work. And it shows up in how our communication with ourselves is very often stuck in the mind chatter. And to be honest, we lose so much time every day to the mind chatter, the conversations we have with ourselves, because it's not productive. And so our self-talk affects our self-respect, which then affects our self-care. This is part of what we talked about last time. I'm just briefly going over that for those of you who were not there, and as a reminder for those of you who were there or saw the replay. And so this idea that we know ourselves better by getting closer into contact with the self-talk through self-awareness. So we're building that bridge today between self-talk and self-awareness. And what happens is that the more self-aware we can become, the more we grow our self-knowledge as well. And so one of the bits and pieces about that, one of the pieces about that is that the more we know ourselves, the better we are as moms, as friends, as parents in general, as spouses, as relationship in general are affected by that relationship with ourselves. And it's also how we show up as work. It's part of our self-leadership. It's part of our presence as leaders in the workplace as well, right? Because as you can see, the self-talk, if the self-talk, if we're beating ourselves up, last time we talked about if you're your inner critic, what are you saying to yourself? And there was not that many of you that were in here last week, so I don't know if you did the homework, but the homework was, what are some of the things you say to yourself? Kind of like, oh, you're not smart enough, you're not fast enough, you don't know enough. Like all of these things that we say to ourselves every day as the day goes on, when we meet challenges, what would we say instead that would make more of an inner coach? Oh, we could say, if I say, oh my God, I am so stupid, I don't know this. You can say, well, okay, well, I'm in the process of figuring out how to learn this. Or I am growing this part of my knowledge base, or I am learning how to do these things. That's what the coach is saying. That's what the inner coach is saying. The inner coach might also say, you got this. It's not true that you don't know it. You do know it. Just trust yourself, right? And so that could also be the inner coach. So it depends on what you would like someone else to say to you instead of that inner critic that you are saying to yourself all the time. So what we also talked about last time was that the emotional connection between rethinking self-care and unlocking our personal power. Because our relationship with self, our relationship with others, and relationship with work is how we show up in the world, but it comes back to self. Self comes first, not last. Because who we are in relationship with other people, which is also going to be part of the conversation today in terms of awareness, that has to do with our emotional intelligence. And if we're not taking care of ourselves and have this positive relationship with ourselves, we're not going to have a positive relationship with other people because we're going to cover up what we believe about ourselves. That's why the inner critic is such an important part to shift into the inner coach, okay? And again, from last time, we were talking about how we feel, how we interact with others. It is affecting our self-worth altogether. How we feel, how we take care of ourselves, how we interact is all affecting our self-worth. So one of the things that the conclusion we can say from last session, I told the story of my mom who believed that she was unwanted, she was an accident because she was an illegitimate child. She was supposed to be given away for adoption. And then after she died, my grandmother said, no, 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 no. It wasn't that. It was that I couldn't marry the man I really, really loved. And I wanted to keep the child so badly, I begged to keep her. And I loved her so much, and everybody thought she was the cutest thing in the world. And so my mother had a different story than my grandmother had, but she never asked. So the story my mother told herself caused her self-worth to be really, really poor. So we can argue that our happiness, but also our productivity, also our self-care, all of these things are so tied into the stories we're telling ourselves every single day about who we are. And that's where we come back to what is the topic today, which is self-awareness. So You were saying before, Nicole, this idea of not having enough time. Totally get it. But what happens when we are using the time to debate with ourselves, our self-worth, or our place in the world, or are we giving ourselves permission to take care of ourselves? Even if we're busy with other things, we put that first. So a lot of these stories that are going on in the relationship we have with ourselves is based on who we were as a, little beautiful baby coming out and just being all love. And then we grow up and we start noticing the relationship with other people, and we start making choices about ourselves. So the little you is probably what shows up sometimes when the inner critic shows up. Then there's a person today who then becomes little you from time to time. Can we get that to focus? I don't know where the future you is, but can we get you to, when the today you show up, using our awareness, using our emotional intelligence, awareness, emotional intelligence, mindfulness is very interconnected. It's really it's an essential core part of self-care. Can we, instead of going back to little you that has the story that you learned when you did not have the tools, right? When we didn't have the tools to feel better about ourselves, when we were teased at school, for example, or when we were trying to do something and we couldn't really figure out how to do it because we didn't know, we were too small, and maybe we were told that we were stupid or that we weren't smart enough, or whatever the messages that we heard as little you are very often the messages that today you is the inner critic. And it's the awareness that brings us to the future you. It's the awareness that you use in today. Noticing when you regress back to little you, who are you becoming? That's a choice. That's a choice that we make all the time. And I'm going to stop sharing right now because I want to go back out and just see. That was the self-care, the self-communication that we talked about from last time. And today is the self-awareness that we're talking about today. Self-awareness is what we're going to talk about today, right? So the little you that sort of becomes the you today and the future you, that's where the awareness piece is so important. I'm going to, you were saying I can make everybody panelists so that we can have gala review. Is that what you're saying, Nicole?
Yeah, I was just saying if people, want to share their cameras and be more engaged in the conversation.
Then we can put everybody in.
You make people as panelists, and then once you do that, people have the ability to share their screen if they'd like.
Yep. I'm going to do that right now so we can all get in on this together. And please put on your videos so that we can see each other.
Nobody cares what you look like.
Exactly. Nobody cares what you look like. This is not about being perfect. This is about being in right relationship with ourselves. See if we can do this. Is anybody coming on with your videos? If you're not coming on, I'm going to take you off panelist again.
Oh boy.
Come on, let's go. No? We're not getting people to turn on their cameras.
Oh, it's okay.
Oh, come on. People are like, oh my God, no. I also understand that sometimes people can't. So I'm going to hide non-video participants so that people who come on with video will automatically pop up. How's that? Then that way we don't have a lot of black screens on that. But anybody who wants to turn on video, ask a question, have a conversation about how this works for you, please do that. Hi, Melinda, how are you?
Let me go, my turn.
Hi, you coming on? So
Okay.
you can just, so that we don't have background noise, and just turn on your video. That would be great. And we can have a little more. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I did it. I got the map, Mommy.
And you can also mute them, Jeanette.
Okay, let's see here.
And then you can
I got Belle and I got Brave. Go ahead, you go.
Nice.
All right, mute. There we go. And mute. There we go. All right. Now we have muted, and everybody can come on camera as you wish. How's that? Good. So the idea of self-awareness. So there's several pieces to self-awareness. The simple one is, how am I feeling in my body right now? What is my body? How do I feel? Right. And so we talked last time about just a simple check-in every single day. Start out by saying, hey, how am I right now? How do I feel? It's a very simple, small action that you can take, which brings the awareness more to the forefront. It's this idea that you, on a continuous basis, ask yourself, how am I right now? How do I feel? And as you're learning how to ask that question more of yourself, without judgment, without the inner critic, without the judgment, just coming in and saying, how am I right now? And we talked last time about maybe it's an image that comes to you, maybe it's a word, maybe it's a metaphor, maybe it's a color. It's a little bit like taking the temperature of how you feel in your body and using that to just bring simple awareness to your daily feelings, to your daily emotional. So one of the things that often happens is that the second we ask, how am I right now, we jump to judgment. It's part of the self-talk and the chatter that we talked about, but it's also part of the fact that we don't have tools to really learn about self-awareness. So when I say self-awareness, Nicole, you already work a lot with this, but Nicole, when I say self-awareness, I'm unmuting you now so you can talk to me. There you go. What comes up for you when I say self-awareness?
You know, it's been a beautiful journey. I mean, we've known each other now for, you know, a little bit, and it's been a journey for me as far as I saw you speak about a year and a half ago, and you asked that question, you know, have a chat with yourself, I think is how you said it, have a chat with yourself. And it's actually, for me, as somebody who's on the journey of awareness anyway, and mindfulness, that was like so powerful for me, because while I was more aware, I become more aware of what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. And most importantly, I think why I started it was becoming more aware of my reactions and how they were impacting me and others. But that advice you gave of have a chat with yourself is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jenna, but it feels different. It's different because like being aware of how I'm responding and reacting to my children or my husband, which I thought was in need to be aware of that so I could change that and have a better connection with everybody in the family. Having a chat with myself is a very different form of awareness. It's like what's happening with me without all of those things and all of those components. And so it was a beautiful thing, I think, for people who are listening. Having a chat with yourself is a powerful tool because you need that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's this idea, you know, because so often, and I think the idea here is that there's a couple of different parts of awareness, right? Yeah. There's just the body felt sense, right? How am I right now? And the other one is more the emotional piece. And I'm not saying they're two different things, but we might notice them in two different ways. We might notice how we feel, sort of like I'm a little annoyed, or I'm a little irritable, or maybe I'm a little bit tired, or maybe I'm a little bit overly excited. You know, whatever that feeling is, we might also have an emotion that is more connected to a story, so that it's more like taking us into that place of a feeling and a thought, and how we're like sort of getting a little lost in what it is that we're feeling from that sort of more emotional, like sadness, or I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said, well, sadness isn't a problem. You know, sadness is part of being human. You don't have to be happy all the time. It's very much part of our culture that we think we have to be happy all the time. But that's not human. That's not even natural. But we tend to judge when we're not happy and say, oh, I'm sad. What if sad is okay? What if sad is another doorway to something that we can learn about ourselves? And so that's that. And then the idea of having a chat with ourselves was very interconnected with the self-communication that we talked about last time, right? This idea like, what are you saying to yourself? But also have a chat with your body. And that's where we're going today, right? How are you right now in there? And you have to remember, our bodies need us as much as we need it. We're not going anywhere without our bodies. We just learned that during COVID, right? We need our health extremely much. Like our health is so important to us. But we've been taking it for granted. We tend to take our health for granted until something happens. And I've been constantly seeing how not only do we push self-care in the back, but we don't notice the little signs. A lot of times we get sick and we're like, oh my God, it just came from nowhere. COVID, yes, but there's a lot of times when we get sick where it's maybe more of a chronic illness that all of a sudden comes up as a symptom. And I think I mentioned last time that the meta medicine that I was working with was the connection between unresolved emotional trauma and physical disease. Very often how the interconnection between mind-body medicine, between how our bodies produce cancer. Those are illnesses that come, they are with us for a long time before they actually become sort of like what we call an illness, right? But it's the small things that we can notice, like, oh, my body's starting to give me these little signals. I'm starting to ache here, I'm starting to this here. What if we paid more attention to that? What if we were like, oh, that's interesting. My lower back is a little bit more tight than usual. And what if we then said, well, what's going on? What do you need? What if you started creating more awareness around just those small bodily felt things that happen every day? If you started asking more like, how are you in there? What's going on? Like just on the bodily felt sense. Could you learn how to change your relationship with your body? Could you learn how to become a little bit more aware of what you need so that you can? Could you become more aware and in right relationship, in a kind relationship with your own body, realizing that you're a team? Have that chat, but a good chat that says, all right, let's figure this out. How come that your lower back is so much tighter right now? And then you might be more curious to learn what is it that you're doing right now that's causing that. Maybe you're dehydrated. Maybe you're not sitting properly. Maybe you're not moving enough. Maybe you're just tight over your lower back because you're too stressed. And you need to not only stretch more, but maybe also take more pauses. So if we have that kind relationship with ourselves where we actually have a good chat with our own body, can we be a little bit more in that self-aware place where we shift that the nature of that relationship into something that's productive rather than dismissive of ourselves? This idea of having an inclusive culture that's not toxic at work, it starts with self. Because if we're dismissing ourselves all the time, if we're dismissing how we feel, if we're dismissing our bodies and we're not going to ask for what we need, we're not going to have that self-worth that steps in as when somebody's inappropriate with us. Or we're not going to do it for the friends at work. We're not going to step up for them either and say, wait a minute, that was inappropriate. And right now, culture is changing and we need that. We need that relationship with ourselves that is strong, healthy, and proud. That relationship with ourselves that says, I matter. My body matters. This is what I need so I can be at my best. And I feel that in the past, I've had to sort of like almost argue for why that matters. Like, oh, more productivity, bottom line, it's better for the bottom line in a company. And I think a little bit more like we're like, yeah, I'm not going to do that to myself anymore. I'm not going to come last. Now we need to change that self-worth, that mind chatter, that communication through the awareness so that we really do take responsibility, which is the third part of self-care, and express ourselves for what we need, which is the last part of self-care, right? Nicole, can I ask you to unmute again and just be like having a conversation about that? When you think about a work culture and think about sort of like what's toxic about it and how we engage with ourselves like at work, even if we're working from home.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways that you feel, and I'm not putting you on the spot here, I'm just
Yeah, of course.
brainstorming with you a little bit.
Yeah.
But this idea of like, how do we bring that relationship with us to work that says I matter? What do you feel stands between us and doing that?
I think back to your point of just what the stories you're telling yourself from the time that you were a child. It was interesting when you were talking about that, we don't have the capability as a young person. We don't have the proper brain development to have the tools to say what you're saying is to think through, is that true? Are these stories true? And so I think what happens is that what comes in between is that people are just still telling themselves those same stories because they haven't learned or aren't applying the mental skills tools that they need to be able to process what's the reality here, like what's actually happening versus what's their mind telling them that's happening.
Yeah. Awareness is such an important tool with that. And also that's where the emotional intelligence comes in, right? And that's the mindfulness piece, is really continuously being aware of what's happening to us, therefore how we feel about it, but then making a choice. That's where what we're talking about next time is how does self-responsibility show up like this, right? How do we make these choices that are different so that we're actually shifting how we show up through taking responsibility for our emotions? Now, a lot of times
real quick, I'm just curious for you, like one thing that I hear, some clients of mine say is, that's just how I am. That's just how I'm wired. This is how I've been my whole life. And, I can't change. And so what would you say to somebody who would say to you, this is just how I'm wired. This is how I respond in these circumstances. It's been this way for 40 years. I can't change. What would you say to them?
I will agree. Because change is a choice.
Yeah.
And if they're saying I can't change, they're going to be right.
Yeah, they've made that choice, right?
They made that choice.
Yeah.
And so we cannot change someone else.
Yeah.
But we can change ourselves through making new choices. If we don't make new choices and different choices, we can't do it without awareness. Yeah. Nothing happens without awareness, because then we're just on autopilot. Yeah. And a lot of times what happens in cultures and across, America or the world for that matter, in terms of work, is that we are so much on survival mode, we're so much on automatic that we just do all the things that we've always done. And that place of being where we just react, that is what happens, right? The reaction is what happens that makes us stuck. And if we're not aware, if we don't pause for a moment, if we don't have that pause that says, how do I feel right now? And what do I need so that I can? If we don't pause and ask that and have a chat with ourselves or with our very own body in that moment, there is no change. There really isn't. And so I think that's a big part of why I do the work I do too, because when I first started coaching people and I started working with people who had what I call chronic disease, as in cancer. Because once we're diagnosed with cancer, we're kind of like we don't always have cancer, but we're always in that awareness of cancer, whether we're cured through treatment or not. There's always this idea that it can come back. It came back from my mother 3 times, right? And so this idea that we can be scared of something or we can be aware of something, right? So I want to make sure that we shift our fear of disease to awareness about it. But when we're working all day long on survival mode, we fall back on our training. And our training is very often little u if we're under pressure. If we haven't learned how to engage and interact differently, we're going to respond in defense. And it's a lot of times what happens, especially with what's going on in our society right now, right, is that if we are feeling suppressed in a work environment, especially because we're not being respected and cared about, we're going to respond more from a reaction place rather than an aware place, right? And so, you know, you see the people who yell back at you. They're reacting. They're not responding. If we're responding, we're pausing for a moment, we're aware of how we feel, and then we ask questions so that we can explore how to move forward. That's how to use awareness, right? It's how to use mindfulness. Self-awareness, because our relationship with ourselves, the way we respond to something becomes our relationship with other people. So that self-awareness is crucial to change. Crucial, because that's where we have choice. We have choice in that little gap, in that little pause. See, I have I'm going to screen share that one now. Let's see here.
It'd be interesting too, if you ask somebody, maybe just the audience thinking about it for themselves, what is your relationship with yourself? Ask yourself that question, and then look outward and see what is your relationship with those around you and see where the similarities are.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just that simple, small pause. It doesn't have to be more than a few minutes. And just ask yourself, how am I right now? And what do I need so that I can? Or how am I right now, and how does that make me feel? So emotional intelligence really is us acknowledging how we feel, giving ourselves permission to feel, and then making a choice on how we engage and interact with other people because of that, or how we take care of ourselves because of that. And as you point out, Nicole, our relationship with self shows up in our relationship with others all the time. And it's also how we show up in our relationship with work, which is where we're taking responsibility for our patterns, right? That is that idea of how do we then make habits that actually create change. That's what we're going to talk about next time. That pause is crucial. It is an essential part of awareness, is that we can learn how to pause. It gives us that small window of opportunity to just notice, what do I need right now so that I can? Having that chat. Let me see what the next, here it is. How are you? What do you need so that you can? Like, you can even ask that of other people too. You can ask it of your kids. Hey, how are you right now? What's going on? I see, you know, like even if it's a child that has a, you know, they can't label their emotions. That's why little you is reactionary, because you don't know how to work with your emotions, right? So little you comes up and can't really respond because we haven't learned those tools. And even worse than that, we have learned that our emotions are a problem. We have learned that we should suppress our emotions. We have learned that we should keep our emotions in check, especially at work. We have learned that our emotions are not welcome. I'm asking you to learn about your emotions, because your emotions is the doorway to your superpowers. Your emotions are the doorway to your personal power, to reclaiming your personal power. It is your actions that is the response because of your emotions, rather than a reaction to cover it up, that creates change in how you show up in the world. And it creates change in your self-care for that matter too. Right? And so some of the things that's happening in culture across you know, in work cultures and in general, is that when we're running on survival mode, we don't have the pause. We don't take care of ourselves, so our cortisol levels are through the roof. We might be surviving on coffee like I used to do when I was in the fashion business. We might survive on sugar and stimulants because we didn't get enough sleep. And we might be falsely hungry all the time because we didn't even drink enough water. Those are the very, very basics of self-care. For us to actually take charge of that personal power that we have and reclaim our personal power, if we don't do the self-care 101, it's going to be harder for us to actually be able to have that pause. So I will invite you to think about it as a basic need. Just food, water, sleep. It's a basic need. Is it going to be perfect? No, it's not. But always look for how. The awareness is, what do I need right now so that I can? It may be that you just need a little bit of glass of water. Respect that. Respect what you need. respect yourself for those things. We're asking respect from other people of who we are. It starts with respecting ourselves and taking care of ourselves. And that interaction and engagement with other people is so crucial in everything we do, and it starts with self. So you said, let's ask see if people in the chat, if there's anyone in the chat, questions that are coming up. You can also come on video and ask the questions if you'd like, or you can ask the questions in the chat. Let me know if you have questions around self-awareness, mindfulness, having that pause, and having a chat with yourself that says, how am I right now in there? And what do I need so that I can? No questions.
Quiet group today.
Do you have any questions, Nicole, about that, or comments about that?
Yeah, no, I just find it, that again, the difference between self-awareness with what you're doing outward versus self-awareness to what's happening inward. And the truth is, you do have to ask yourself that question in order to really gain access to it, because it's easy to become aware of what we're doing externally and use mindfulness to actually see what's happening and become aware of your emotions and how you were mentioning how you respond versus react. But to really know what's going on inside yourself, it's a beautiful way to look at it, and it's new for me, so thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I think going back to this idea that we have permission to feel, especially right now, right? Everybody's exhausted, tired, anxious. You know, we have so many feelings right now about what's going on. It's important that we acknowledge that. It's exhausting when we tell ourselves that we just have to get through. I had a conversation with someone about resilience the other day, and we were talking about it as sort of like, well, you know, we have to suppress how we feel about something and just keep going. And I was like, I actually think it's the opposite. I actually think that resilience comes from acknowledging how we feel, being aware of how we feel, and then responding accordingly. You know, responding accordingly so that we can navigate what we need. That is resilience. You had a comment to that, Nicole?
Yeah, I like to use this analogy of, imagine you're in a lake and you have a beach ball and you're sitting on the beach ball and you're pushing it down, and the further you push it, or the further you suppress it in life, right, the fiercer it comes bouncing back up. And I think it is a perfect analogy for what we do if we are suppressing our emotions on a regular basis and we're not allowing them to be and to embrace and to accept. Then the fierceness of the emotion and the feeling comes back so much stronger, and then it becomes even harder to embrace, accept, and learn from it, because we're too busy with this fierce reaction.
Yeah, and it's, you know, I think the resilience comes from that, exactly from that rejection of it. It's this false resilience, right? It's this idea of pushing through no matter what. And the reality of that is that we are much more in a place of looking at it as, well, if I accept how I feel, if I respect my feelings, if that is the vulnerability that we think we can't handle, because we don't want to own how we feel, right? But if we're okay with how we feel, if we own how we feel, then we don't have to hide, right? We don't have to hide.
Yeah, and the other thing I think about when it comes to emotions, like we're either suppressing them, we're distracting ourselves, right, and thinking about something else to take the place, or we're like in our heads and we're thinking, and I'm just in what everything you're saying, like all three of those methods aren't effective, or as effective and close to as effective as what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. You know, I had a conversation, my dad way back, I think in the 80s, he was a headhunter, and he was asked if a person who is gay and being interviewed for a high position like a CEO position should be asked if, you know, their sexual orientation, and if they should say that they were gay. And he said yes. And it was a bit of an uproar. It's like, that's a personal thing. That's this, whatever. And he's like, actually not, because if you can't own who you are, you will try to hide who you are. You will defend who you are. You will feel that you can be put under pressure. And if you are in a CEO position, you can't have something to hide about who you are. And it was an interesting way of looking at how we think of something like that as being not only personal, of course it is, but and these days, nobody cares if you're gay or not, so to speak. You might not feel comfortable around family or whatever it is. Granted, I understand that not everybody is feeling the freedom to express themselves. I totally accept and appreciate that. But if we think about this idea of who we are, right? And it's a big part of our racism right now too, is this idea of being able to be proud. Like, Black people want to be proud of their history. They don't want to be suppressed because of it, right? And even though the history, of course, is that they're suppressed, and it's a horrible situation to be in. I think I can't even imagine being Danish, what it feels like to live a life feeling that you're not good enough, or that you're suppressed, or that you don't belong. And so as cultures moving forward in this sense of belonging and focusing so much more on belonging, the self-awareness piece and the self-care piece is going to be more and more important for us to really get in a new relationship with ourselves not only with ourselves at home, but at work with other people and so on and so forth, where we really feel that we matter, that self-worth is not affected by other people's opinion, because we're so rooted and solid in our own relationship with self. So self-awareness, I want to sort of recap. Self-awareness is both the bodily self-awareness, like, how am I right now? What do I need? Like, is there just that basic sense of tired, fatigued, achy? What are some of the things that you're feeling that you may be able to just sort of take care of right now? The other is the self-awareness that says, emotionally, how do I feel right now? What is something that I need so that I can feel just a little bit better about what it is that I'm feeling? Having permission to feel, knowing that it's okay that we have feelings, and using those feelings as a doorway to ask, well, what is what I need right now so that I can move forward in this way, and see what we're learning when we're an inner coach as well. What are we learning about how we can move forward rather than dismissing ourselves? And then the awareness that is, how do other people trigger us? How do our environment trigger us? How are some of the things that we experience every day trigger us back into little you? Like this idea that we go back. So you probably, when I talk about triggers, have you ever had the feeling that you walk into a room and there's a smell, or there's something that just reminds you of something else? Right? This idea that you are, like, I will walk in somewhere and sometimes I'll be like, it smells like my grandmother's house. Right? It smells like my grandmother's house. And it feels a little bit like, oh, wow. Like, I feel at home, like as if I'm in my grandmother's house right now. And that might give us a desire for a specific food, or if we smell a specific food, we want it, but we didn't want it just 2 minutes ago, right? Or we hear something that reminds us of something. It's like we're triggered back in time. We're triggered back to an old memory. And so these memories are very often bringing us back to who we were, and we want to feel that way again. And so that self-awareness in that moment that says, wow, I wonder why, why I feel this way. Well, it could be that there was a trigger. It could be that there was something that triggered you to feel that way. But you can also then use your self-awareness and say, if you don't want to fall into that, right? You might fall into that goes, oh, I'm reacting because of, you might want to then You might want to then come into that question again, that chat with yourself that says, oh, what's going on right now? How do I feel? What do I need so that I can? Because the trigger comes from something on the outside. So we're always going to be triggered. And I hear that a lot of times, and that's a little bit relative to what you were saying before, Nicole, was when people say, I can't change, I've been this way forever. It's because we're not aware of our triggers. And so if we're not aware of our triggers, we are just going to respond the way we did as little you rather than future you. Have you ever noticed that, Nicole, when there's something that comes up in your environment and all of a sudden you're like, you remember something from your childhood or something?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it's funny because it's more smells, like similar to what you were saying, that there's a smell and it immediately puts me back in a place of when I was younger.
Yeah.
Men's cologne, ex-boyfriends, I don't know, that's one thing. I was like, oh, that smells so good. Why do I remember that? Not a little girl, but a teenager.
Yeah.
But yeah, smell for me is a big one. How about you?
Yeah, but it is the smell, it can be the sound, it can be how something just feels like there's an air of something. But it also comes from people's reactions, right? Somebody looks at you a specific way and you react because you feel that you feel judged, or they say something to you that reminds you of something that somebody also said. So all of these places are places where we can practice awareness.
Yeah, that's actually a good example, as far as I think a lot of us experience at work. Sometimes when we respond to our colleagues, or we realize, if you're more aware, you'd realize the response isn't necessarily what your colleague said, but it's how it made you feel because of some other experience that's happened to you in the past, that's really what you're reacting to. And I think I even noticed that with my husband, as far as like when I react to something, having the ability to go and be present enables me to see, okay, actually that wasn't what he said that's making me upset, it's how it made me feel based on my own experience as a child. So like, to give you a good example, like when he would come home from work, he would tend to be very stressed out and detached. And before I started my mindfulness practice, it would create this uncomfortability in me. And maybe it's not to get too personal, but you know what, this is a coaching session, so why not? My parents got divorced when I was young. My father wasn't around, and not being around meant to me detachment, and I'm leaving, right? And so once I was able to practice being more mindful, practice being more present, and not being triggered with that, because initially he'd come home and I'd be triggered because of his intensity, and then we'd be in 2 hours, and 2 hours later, now we're finally enjoying a glass of wine and enjoying each other's company. And once I was able to stop doing that and just let him, he needs 20 minutes, he can't transition well, and a lot of spouses, I don't think, transition well, and a lot of the people receiving that tend to react and think it has something to do with them based on the stories they tell themselves. And what was really beautiful, Jeanette, is like once I was able to stop reacting and being triggered, okay, it was 20 minutes. He did his thing. He wound down. We were then enjoying a glass of wine, talking about our days and our children and whatever. And it was a function of being more present about being triggered and why I was being triggered.
Yeah. And that's basically awareness in action, is mindfulness in action, right? We're aware, we pause. We spend that small moment to create a gap where we can create change. That's what's so powerful about awareness. That is why we need that pause.
Yeah.
Any questions about that? And if not, we are going to finish off our day and take it from there. Any questions? Is there any questions in the chat? I don't see any.
No questions. All right, everybody. That was really wonderful, Jeanette. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Practice the awareness piece and just notice all the little things where you can just pause and notice how it makes you feel. Pause and notice how it makes you feel, whether it's in your body or emotionally, or it's just a reaction that you feel that you're about to do. Just
Yeah.
start learning how to pause and have a chat with your very own body or your emotions. Just notice what's there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeanette. Everyone, happy Friday. Have a great weekend. Thank you for
Happy
participating.
Friday. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.